Imagine for a second a completely invisible piece of infrastructure. I mean, it has no physical mass whatsoever.
Right.
It costs literally $0 to manufacture. You can't touch it. You can't weigh it on a scale. And yet, and this is the crazy part, if it just vanished tomorrow, the International Space Station would go dark.
Oh, instantly.
Yeah, global trade networks would freeze in, what, a matter of hours. The entire internet would basically collapse into this fragmented, unusable mess.
Meh.
So today, we are talking about this invisible architecture that completely dictates how the modern world operates.
Which is language.
Exactly. We are talking about language, but not, and I want to be clear here, not as a form of poetry or art, but as a rigid, load-bearing tool.
It's essentially the operating system for human civilization right now. I mean, we tend to think of physical things, cargo ships, fiber optic cable, satellites. We think of those as the things connecting us.
Right, the hardware.
Yeah, the hardware. But those physical tools are completely useless if the people operating them cannot coordinate. The hardware absolutely requires a software protocol to function.
It needs a shared protocol. And that really brings us to our mission for this deep dive. Because if you are listening to this right now, maybe you're, I don't know, commuting to work, or maybe you're sitting at a desk, you are constantly interacting with this global software.
Every single day.
Right. And you want to understand the underlying mechanics of why the world actually works the way it does. You don't want the surface level trivia here. You want the structural reality. So today we are going to explore the foundational, highly pragmatic motivations behind why human beings collectively adopt a specific shared language, specifically something like English, as a universal tool.
And to do this, we're grounding our discussion in a really fascinating text. It's an excerpt written by facilitator and trainer Mohammed Farouk Rashid bin Hukam Ali bin Shajarat Ali.
It's a great piece.
It really is. And what makes this source material so compelling is just its brutal pragmatism. I mean, it completely strips away the romanticism that's usually associated with linguistics.
Yeah, there's no poetry here.
None at all. It doesn't argue about which language sounds the prettiest or has the best history. It just breaks down the adoption of English into these distinct, undeniable categories of pure utility.
It is a phenomenal breakdown. I mean, the author gives us 20 distinct, concrete reasons why this happens. And then, and I love this part, he hits us with one massive, crucial, philosophical caveat at the very end that just completely reframes the whole conversation.
It completely flips it.
It really does. But before we get into the mechanics of all that, I do want to set the tone here. Because while English happens to be the subject on the surface of this text, the real underlying topic we are dissecting today is human cooperation. Like, how do we actually coordinate a planet of 8 billion people?
That's the real question.
So, okay, let's unpack this. And I want to start at the absolute highest altitude. Let's look at the macro level drivers. How does the globe actually function?
Well, the macro scale is where you really see these massive network effects take hold. I mean, the author starts by identifying the huge pillars of the modern globalized world. He points to diplomacy, business and trade, science and technology, and, the architecture of the internet itself.
The big ones.
Yeah. And these aren't just sectors, they are the circulatory systems of global power and progress.
So let's actually look at the mechanics of that, because it's so easy to just say it helps diplomacy and then move on. But let's put ourselves in a really high-stakes environment, like a global security summit or a massive negotiation on international climate regulations.
Right.
The text specifically points to English as a primary language in these international organizations. Why is having that single shared standard so incredibly critical in that room?
Because friction in those specific environments isn't just inconvenient, it's catastrophic. Like, think about the chain of communication without a shared standard. If a diplomat from, say, Brazil wants to negotiate a highly nuanced, legally binding treaty with a diplomat from Japan, and neither speaks the other's language, you are relying entirely on a chain of simultaneous translators.
Right, which, I mean, sounds fine in theory.
In theory, sure, but in practice, every single time a concept passes through a translator, a microscopic layer of nuance is altered. It's inevitable.
Like a game of telephone?
Exactly like that. Idioms don't translate perfectly. Cultural context definitely doesn't translate perfectly. And in high-stakes diplomacy, I mean, a slightly mistranslated adjective can literally be the difference between a peace treaty and a trade war.
Oh, wow. Yeah, when you put it like that.
Right. So the author highlights that international organizations use a primary language to just eliminate that translation chain entirely. It allows two diplomats with completely different native tongues to just look each other in the eye and speak with a mutually agreed upon legal and structural vocabulary. The friction is just removed.
It creates this standardized protocol for negotiation. And, that concept of a standardized protocol actually makes me think of an analogy here.
Oh, let's hear it.
Okay, looking at the text points on science, technology, and the internet, is English essentially the USB-C cable of human interaction?
Okay, I like where this is going.
Hear me out. A USB-C cable isn't necessarily the most beautiful cable ever designed. It might not even be the theoretical pinnacle of data transfer technology, but it is the agreed-upon standard.
Right, it's universal.
Yeah. If you want to plug into a monitor or transfer a massive file or charge a device, you need that specific port. If you don't have it, you just can't interact with the network. But I do want to push back on this a bit, because if I take this analogy to its absolute logical conclusion,
Go ahead.
well, based on the author's assertion that the bulk of online content and new discoveries are shared in this language, does this mean a brilliant non-English speaker is just fundamentally delayed in accessing human progress? Like, is the system actually that rigid?
What's fascinating here is how the text explicitly frames access to innovation right alongside science and technology. The author states really clearly that new discoveries and technologies are often first shared in English.
First shared.
Yeah. So to address your pushback, yes, the system is exactly that rigid. The delay is structural. If you lack the USB-C port, to use your analogy, you literally cannot download the data until someone builds you an adapter.
Which means waiting for a translation.
Precisely. Let's look at how science actually functions today, practically speaking. Imagine a team of researchers in Germany discovers some massive breakthrough in renewable battery storage.
Huge news.
Massive. The imperative is to get that data peer-reviewed and distributed to the global scientific community as fast as humanly possible, right? So others can replicate it and build upon it.
Right, because time is of the essence.
Exactly. They do not have the time or the funding, quite frankly, to simultaneously publish their findings in Mandarin, Spanish, Hindi, and Arabic. They just don't.
So they default to the standard.
They publish it in the international standard. And if you are, say, a brilliant engineer in South Korea and you don't read that standard, you might not hear about that breakthrough until a localized journal translates it months or maybe even years later.
And in fields like tech and renewable energy, I mean, a delay of a year means you are entirely irrelevant. The frontier has already moved way past you.
It moved on, yeah. Ideas spread more quickly when many people understand the same language as the text notes. So language at this macro scale is not just some cultural accessory. It is the literal physical highway system of global advancement. If you aren't on the highway, you are taking the dirt roads.
I really like that highway metaphor because it applies so perfectly to what the author says about business and trade next. The text states it's a common working language for international companies.
Well, think about the supply chain of literally any modern device, like the phone in your pocket right now.
Okay.
The raw materials might be mined in South America, right?
Mm-hmm.
The microchips designed in Europe, the assembly done in Southeast Asia, and the marketing handled in North America.
Right. It's completely decentralized.
Exactly. And the logistical nightmare of coordinating that across a dozen different corporate entities is just impossible without a standardized communication protocol.
I guess I never really thought about how fragile that whole chain would be without a shared language. I mean, you'd have invoices, engineering schematics, safety regulations, all of it requiring constant, flawless translation just to keep a single factory running.
It would be completely economically unviable. The cost of translation and the inevitable errors that would pop up would just destroy the profit margins.
It would grind to a halt.
It would.
Yeah.
This is why international companies adopt it as a working language. It's a pure economic necessity. It's not a preference. And this creates this massive compounding effect, especially when we look at the author's point about internet access.
Right, because the text points out that a huge portion of online content is in this language.
And that right there is the ultimate positive feedback loop. The early architecture of the internet was built heavily in English.
Because of ARPANET and early U.S. tech dominance, right?
Yeah, exactly. And because the infrastructure and the early content were in that language, millions of people around the world realized they needed to learn it just to access the information.
Just to get online and see what was happening.
Right. And once they learned it, what did they do? They started creating their own content and businesses in English to reach that massive, newly established global audience.
Oh, I see. Which just adds even more weight to the network, basically forcing the next generation to learn it even faster. It's like a gravitational pull.
That's exactly it.
The bigger the planet gets, the harder it is to escape its orbit. You learn it to access the knowledge, and then you use it to create new knowledge, which just locks the standard in even tighter.
That is the perfect way to describe these macro-level drivers. It is a system of immense gravity. And that gravity naturally dictates what happens at the very next level down. I mean, if the entire world runs on this overarching operating system, then individuals have to engage with that operating system to build their own lives within it.
Which brings us perfectly to the meso-level drivers. Because, global systems are ultimately made up of individual human beings just trying to navigate their lives.
Right.
We are shifting here from how the world runs to how an individual's career runs.
Right.
If English is the global operating system, how does this text suggest individuals use it to actually level up?
Well, the author provides a really pragmatic roadmap here for upward mobility. It's essentially a list of the thresholds an individual has to cross to fully participate in the global economy.
Let's trace that roadmap because he's very specific. The text starts with education, pointing out that many books, research papers, and university courses are simply in English.
Yes.
Then it moves straight into employment, stating clearly that a lot of jobs require English proficiency. It mentions networking for building professional relationships across borders. It highlights academic collaboration, allowing researchers to cooperate globally. And finally, it points to leadership opportunities, stating that strong communication skills open doors in these global settings.
This is where the abstract concept of a global highway system becomes deeply, deeply personal. We aren't talking about abstract trade agreements anymore. We are talking about whether or not someone gets a job to feed their family or gets accepted into a top-tier university.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, and I want to get your take on this. When I look at these points, education, employment, leadership, I have to be honest, it sounds a whole lot like gatekeeping.
It does, yes.
I really want to push you on this. Is learning English, in this specific context, less about expanding your mind and more about acquiring a literal VIP pass to global institutions? I mean, the text literally says it opens doors to leadership. Is this just systemic elitism disguised as a practical necessity? Are we losing out on brilliant leaders just because they don't have the quote-unquote VIP pass?
That is a very valid critique of the system, and frankly, it's a reality we have to acknowledge. Yes, there are undeniably brilliant minds who are marginalized simply because they lack access to the language.
Right.
However, if we look closely at what the author is synthesizing here regarding academic collaboration and leadership opportunities, the text isn't actually arguing that English makes you a better leader inherently.
Okay, so what is it arguing?
It is arguing that modern leadership requires a very specific type of influence. We are operating in global settings, as the text says. Modern problems are almost never localized anymore.
True.
If you are trying to solve a crisis in, say, global supply chains, or you're trying to lead a multinational medical initiative, you are coordinating with experts from a dozen different cultural and linguistic backgrounds simultaneously.
You're managing a very complex room.
Exactly. And leadership in that environment is no longer just about dictating orders from the top down. It is about synthesizing diverse perspectives. And here's the bottom line. You cannot synthesize what you cannot understand.
Okay. So the argument is that leadership fundamentally requires shared understanding. You can't lead a team if the team fundamentally can't communicate with each other and you can't communicate with them.
Precisely. The text specifically highlights how a shared language enables people from different backgrounds to work together effectively. Like, if you are a world-class engineer in Nairobi and another world-class engineer is in Jakarta, your combined potential to solve a complex problem is mathematically zero if you cannot exchange those complex ideas.
Because there's no conduit.
Right. The language is the bridge, therefore leadership, which is the act of coordinating those diverse minds across that bridge, mandates mastery of the bridge itself.
Okay, I see the distinction now. So it is a VIP pass, but not necessarily an arbitrary one. It's a VIP pass because you literally cannot do the actual work of the VIP room without it. The work happening in that room relies entirely on multidisciplinary cross-border coordination.
Exactly. The author is being coldly descriptive here, not prescriptive. He's not saying this is how it should be. He's saying this is how it is. He states that many jobs require English proficiency and that networking builds professional relationships across borders. It is just a pragmatic, non-negotiable requirement for entry into a certain tier of the global marketplace. If an individual wants upward mobility, if they want to read the cutting-edge books and take the advanced university courses that the text mentions, they have to acquire the tool of access.
But doesn't this just highlight a massive disparity in how people start their lives. I
Hmm.
mean, if you were listening to this right now and you were born into a community that already speaks this global language natively, you were essentially born holding that VIP pass.
You were.
The doors to global education, international employment, academic collaboration, they were all unlocked for you by default. You didn't even have to think about it for a second.
It is an immense, mostly invisible privilege.
But if you aren't born with it, this text lays out the brutal reality of why you have to expend thousands of hours of mental energy to learn it. You aren't doing it just for a fun hobby. You are doing it for survival. You are doing it for employment. You're doing it just to have a seat at the table in global problem solving.
And that ties directly into the author's point about networking, because networking isn't just handing out business cards at a conference, it's building trust.
Yeah, real relationship.
And trust requires nuance, it requires humor, it requires shared context. When the text says it helps build professional relationships across borders, it implies that without that shared linguistic framework, you just remain an outsider.
You're out of the loop.
You can be the most qualified person in the room, absolutely, but if you cannot participate in the informal communication that actually drives professional relationships, your upward mobility is severely capped.
It really emphasizes how intensely practical this is. The motivation to learn the language at this meso level is tied entirely to livelihood and advancement in a modern economy.
Which is actually a perfect segue, because while livelihood is undeniably crucial, the author doesn't stop there. He pushes the analysis even deeper, past the corporate and academic structures, right down into the individual human experience.
Right, let's make that shift now, because we've covered the macro global systems, we've covered the meso career ladders. Let's completely strip away the boardrooms, the UN assemblies, and the university lecture halls.
Let's do it.
Let's look at the micro level drivers. We are talking about the human brain, interpersonal connection, and the immediate physical needs of a human being just moving through an unpredictable world.
This is where the text transitions from the systemic to the deeply personal and even cognitive.
And the author provides a really comprehensive list here.
Yep.
Let's walk through the mechanics of these deeply human factors. He starts with basic communication, which is simply the fundamental human need to understand and be understood.
Right.
Then he brings up travel, helping people communicate across multiple countries. We see cultural exchange, the ability to enjoy literature, films, music, and ideas from around the world.
Yes, very important.
Then there's this highly specific cognitive point, personal growth, where he claims learning another language actually improves memory, critical thinking, and cognitive flexibility.
That one is fascinating.
He mentions building confidence in international environments. Then, a starkly practical one, emergency situations, where a common language is crucial for seeking help. And finally, acting as a bridge between cultures to actively reduce misunderstandings.
It is quite a juxtaposition, isn't it? I mean, we've gone from the architecture of the internet and international trade agreements down to the sheer vulnerability of needing help in a physical emergency, or the internal mechanics of a person's memory.
It's a huge shift in scale. And I want to zero in on that personal growth aspect first, because it feels fundamentally different from everything else we've discussed so far.
How so?
Well, up until now, we've talked about language as a tool you use externally, like to talk to a diplomat, to read a paper, to get a job. But the author claims this tool improves critical thinking and cognitive flexibility inside your head.
Yes, he does.
My question is, how? Is learning this language essentially like downloading a cognitive software update for your brain? Like, how does memorizing a vocabulary list actually change your critical thinking?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture of neuroscience and linguistics, the author's claim is incredibly accurate. Language is not just a passive mechanism for expressing thoughts that already exist. It is the active framework in which those thoughts are constructed.
Wait, you're saying the structure of the language dictates the structure of the thought itself?
Yes, absolutely. When you learn a new language, you aren't just memorizing new audio files for old concepts. It's not just a find and replace function. You are learning an entirely new structural logic.
Interesting.
Different languages force you to pay attention to different aspects of reality. Some languages force you to constantly specify gender. Others force you to specify the exact direction of movement. Others force you to specify your exact social relationship to the person you are speaking to through these really complex honorifics.
So you have to perceive the world differently to even speak the sentence correctly.
Exactly. So when the text mentions cognitive flexibility, it's referring to the brain's ability to jump between those completely different realities.
That is wild.
You are forcing your brain to switch between different frameworks of meaning. You have to constantly evaluate a concept and decide how to best articulate it across completely different systems of logical syntax.
So it's a workout.
It is a massive cognitive workout that mental gymnastics fundamentally strengthens the neural pathways associated with critical analysis and memory. You are actively training your brain to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously.
I love that. So it's not just a tool you hold in your hand, it's a tool that actively reshapes the hand that holds it. It upgrades the processor itself.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it, yes. The act of acquiring this global operating system actually changes the hardware of the brain. But, the text also highlights the external physical reality of the micro level.
Right, the immediate physical reality of just navigating the world.
Yeah.
I really want to talk about travel and emergency situations, because the author says a common language can be crucial for seeking help during travel or disasters.
This is where it gets very grounded.
Yeah, this strips away all the prestige we've talked about. We aren't talking about VIP passes or cognitive updates here. We are talking about language as a literal survival tool.
What's fascinating here is the psychology of vulnerability. I mean, imagine you are traveling in a foreign country. You don't speak a single word of the local language.
Okay, terrifying already.
Right. And suddenly a medical emergency occurs, or a natural disaster strikes, or even something less dramatic but still scary, like getting profoundly lost late at night in a bad neighborhood.
Yeah, panic sets in immediately.
In that specific moment, the complex structures of global diplomacy and academic collaboration that we talked about, they are utterly meaningless to you.
You don't care about peer-reviewed science journals when you need an ambulance.
Precisely. What matters is the ability to communicate distress and coordinate immediate physical aid. When you cannot communicate, you are effectively stripped of all your agency. You become completely dependent and isolated.
It's a terrifying feeling.
It is. And the text highlights that English serves as this emergency bridge in those moments. And it isn't because English has, better or more urgent words for help. It's entirely because of the macro level distribution we discussed earlier.
Right, it goes back to the math. It's a numbers game.
It is a pure statistical safety net. Because it is so widely distributed globally, your mathematical chances of finding a stranger or a police officer or a medical professional who understands a basic plea for help in English are significantly higher than in almost any other language outside the local one.
It just reduces the friction of the unknown. Like when you are navigating a transit strike in a city where you don't speak the language, you aren't looking for deep cultural poetry. You are looking for the absolute bare minimum communication protocol to get back to your hotel safely.
Yes, just the basics.
And that safety net builds what the author calls confidence.
Knowing you have a tether.
Exactly. You can step into an international environment and know you won't be completely isolated. You retain some agency. And I think that leads directly into the text's points on cultural exchange and being a bridge between cultures.
Yes, a very important pivot.
The author notes it allows people to enjoy literature, films, and music from around the world, and helps reduce misunderstandings.
And if we look closely at this, it might actually be one of the most vital functions of a shared language in a heavily polarized world.
Really, more than business or science.
Well, we've spent a lot of time on how it facilitates trade and science, and that's true, but we absolutely cannot ignore how it facilitates empathy.
How so? Unpack that for me.
Think about it. When you can consume the art, the literature, and the films of another culture directly, or at least through a widely understood shared medium, you begin to internalize their worldview.
You see things through their eyes.
Right. The text emphasizes that this reduces misunderstandings. In a world with competing global interests and a lot of tension, the ability to genuinely understand the nuance, the humor, and the historical pain of someone else's culture is a massive stabilizing force.
It humanizes them.
Exactly. You stop seeing them as some abstract, geopolitical other and start seeing them as human beings with shared experiences.
Because you can finally hear their stories.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really hard to demonize a culture when you are actively reading their literature and laughing at their films on a Saturday night. The language acts as the conduit for that empathy.
It does. The micro-level drivers are all about giving the individual agency, safety, and connection in a vast, complex, and sometimes very lonely world. The language empowers them to move through it safely, to grow cognitively, and to connect deeply with people they otherwise would never, ever have a mechanism to know.
Okay, I actually need to pause this here because we have just spent this entire deep dive laying out an overwhelmingly compelling case for why this language is a massive, indispensable tool. I mean, let's just review what we just discussed based on this text.
It's a long list.
It runs the world's economy. It dictates global diplomacy. It is the literal highway for scientific innovation. It opens the doors to leadership and higher education. It literally upgrades the physical wiring of your brain. And it acts as a statistical safety net that might save your life in a foreign emergency.
It sounds pretty incredible when you stack it all up like that.
Right. If we stop the analysis right here, English sounds like the ultimate human achievement. It sounds like a magical artifact that fell from the sky.
It does. If you only look at the sheer utility, it is very easy to conclude that it is the greatest, most superior language ever created by humanity.
And that is exactly why the author's final point is so brilliant. It is a massive narrative pivot.
It changes everything.
Because the author of our source text, after giving us 20 unassailable, rock-solid reasons why this tool is vital, drops a philosophical anchor that completely reframes everything we just talked about. He forces us to distinguish between utility and inherent value.
This is undoubtedly the most critical part of the entire text. It provides the absolute necessary philosophical grounding to counteract the overwhelming list of pragmatic benefits we just went through.
Because otherwise it's just bragging.
Right. Without this final point, the text would just be linguistic propaganda.
So let's read exactly what the author writes under the heading, Important Point. He states, English is not inherently superior to other languages. Every language carries its own culture, history, and wisdom. English is widely learned mainly because historical, economic, scientific, and global communication factors have made it a common international language.
Powerful words.
And he concludes with a clear directive. People should value their mother tongue while also learning other languages when they serve educational, professional, or social purposes. So, what does this all actually mean? How do we reconcile this massive caveat with the huge list of benefits we just discussed?
Well, this raises an incredibly important question about how we as a society assign value to things. The text is demanding that we aggressively separate the usefulness of an object from its intrinsic human worth.
It reminds me of a human tendency we have. Like, we constantly conflate the concept of widely used with the concept of inherently better. Let me throw out an analogy, and you tell me if this tracks with what the author is saying here.
Go ahead, let's hear the analogy.
Okay, let's look at a massive global fast food chain. You know the one I'm talking about. Millions and millions of people eat their hamburgers every single day in almost every country on Earth. It is unquestionably the most widely consumed hamburger in human history. It is highly efficient. It is perfectly standardized. You know exactly what it's going to taste like whether you buy it in Tokyo or London or New York.
The ultimate standardized product.
Exactly. It serves a massive global utility for cheap, fast calories. But does that global dominance make it the greatest culinary achievement in human history?
Obviously not.
Right. Does the sheer volume of its consumption make it intrinsically, inherently superior to a deeply complex, centuries-old meal cooked from your grandmother's recipe?
Of course not. It simply makes it the most successfully distributed product. The fast food burger is optimized for logistics. It's not optimized for soul.
Ah, optimized for logistics, not soul. I love that.
And that is precisely the distinction the author is making about English. Look at the specific words the text uses: historical, economic, scientific, and global communication factors.
Notice what is missing from that list.
Exactly. The author deliberately does not say English is learned because it is more beautiful or more expressive or more romantic or structurally superior. He strips all the ego entirely away.
It's purely functional.
It is learned because of historical momentum, colonial legacy, and modern economic gravity. It is a tool of logistics.
It's the USB-C cable again. It's just the standard we ended up with. It's not the pinnacle of human art.
Right, but the author goes much further than just humbling the global language here. By stating that every language carries its own culture, history, and wisdom, the text elevates the mother tongue.
It puts it on a pedestal.
It positions the native language not as a tool of global utility, but as a sacred vessel of human heritage.
A vessel of human heritage.
Yeah.
Okay, unpack that. What does that actually mean in practice when we talk about a mother tongue carrying wisdom?
It means that a language is an archive. When a language is lost, or even when a person just devalues their own mother tongue in favor of a purely utilitarian global language, they aren't just losing a different set of phonetic sounds for the same objects.
They're losing more than just vocabulary.
They are losing the specific historical wisdom, the unique cultural worldview, and the deeply nuanced philosophy that is literally encoded within its grammar and idioms. I mean, there are words in certain languages that describe relationships to nature or complex family dynamics that simply do not have a translation in English.
Because English didn't evolve to care about those specific nuances.
Right. Every language evolves to map the specific reality and values of the people speaking it. If you abandon mother tongue, you basically burn the archive of your ancestors.
Wow, burning the archive. So the goal the author is advocating for here isn't replacement at all. He's not saying throw away your language and adopt a global one because it's better. He is arguing for addition.
That is the absolute crux of his final sentence. People should value their mother tongue while also learning other languages when they serve educational, professional, or social purposes. It is a dual-track approach to linguistic and cultural identity.
So you keep the vessel of your culture and you pick up the tool of global communication. You don't throw away your grandmother's centuries-old recipe just because you figured out how to navigate a fast food menu when you're in a hurry on a Tuesday.
Exactly.
You recognize that one serves the purpose of deep, irreplaceable cultural nourishment and identity, while the other serves the purpose of broad social or professional logistics.
It is an incredibly grounded and honestly a very healthy way to approach globalization. It completely removes the arrogance and the linguistic chauvinism that can sometimes surround widely spoken languages.
It humbles the whole system.
The text is basically looking the reader in the eye and saying, yes, this language is powerful. Yes, you should absolutely learn it if you want to access the global systems of science, business, and leadership. But do not for a second let that economic power convince you that it is intrinsically better than the language your grandparents spoke.
It treats the learner with profound respect, and it treats human diversity with respect. It acknowledges the undeniable pragmatic reality of a globalized world. Like all the macro, meso, and micro drivers we spent this time analyzing, but it does so without sacrificing the soul of local cultures.
It's just a masterclass in separating utility from identity.
Okay, we have covered a massive amount of ground today. Let's briefly retrace this journey for you, the listener, just to lock it all in. We started by looking at how language powers the massive global systems, the macro level.
The big picture.
Right. We saw how a shared standard acts as the absolute necessary infrastructure for international science, multinational business, high-stakes diplomacy, and the very architecture of the Internet. It is the highway system of the modern world, and without it, progress just halts.
Then we zoomed into the meso level, analyzing how individuals are essentially forced to use this shared standard for their own upward mobility. We explored how it acts as the necessary bridge for academic collaboration, and how it is the non-negotiable prerequisite for leadership in international settings, basically because you cannot coordinate diverse minds without a shared protocol.
From there, we looked inward at the micro level. We explored the fascinating reality of how acquiring this linguistic tool actively alters the wiring of our brains, improving cognitive flexibility and critical thinking.
The mental workout.
Exactly. We looked at how it gives us vital agency and confidence in travel, serves as an undeniable safety net in physical emergencies, and allows for direct cultural exchange that fosters deep geopolitical empathy.
And finally, we grounded that entire pragmatic discussion in the author's profound closing caveat. We made the vital distinction between the immense, undeniable utility of a global language and the irreplaceable intrinsic value, history, and wisdom held within every single mother tongue.
So to you listening right now, wherever you are, I really want you to reflect on this framework. Think about the languages you speak, or the ones you are currently expending the mental energy to learn. Look at the motivations we unpacked today.
Ask yourself why.
Are you learning a language primarily for the networking and upward mobility? Are you using it for cultural exchange, to consume art and literature you otherwise just couldn't access? Or perhaps you've actually felt that cognitive flexibility, that mental software update that the author mentioned.
Whatever the reason is.
Right, whatever your reason for wielding the global tool, take a moment today to also appreciate the deep historical archive held in your own mother tongue. Recognize it not just as a random collection of vocabulary words, but as a living vessel of your history.
It really is a powerful lens through which to view every conversation we have.
It really is. And I want to leave you with one final, provocative thought to mull over, building directly on the author's concluding point. The text explicitly states that this global language is widely learned because of historical, economic, scientific, and global communication factors.
Right, the logistics.
It is not magic. It is a product of highly specific global conditions and economic gravity. So if that is the case, what happens if the geographic and economic centers of the world shift dramatically over the next century?
Ooh, that's a great question.
If the gravity moves, will humanity's international language inevitably shift along with it? Will the USB-C standard change? It's something to think about. Until next time, keep digging deeper.